Let us journey back in time, to the heart of the ancient world, to witness the birth of one of the greatest and most influential empires in all of human history. This is the story of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a colossal entity that, at its peak, would stretch all the way from the Indus Valley in the east to the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west. Its establishment marked the beginning of a new and revolutionary era in governance, in culture, and in imperial strategy. This is the story of how that great empire rose to prominence, a story that begins with its legendary founder, Cyrus the Great. The Achaemenid dynasty itself was named after its semi-legendary founder, a man named Achaemenes, though the historical details about his life remain scarce and shrouded in the mists of time. The true historical beginnings of this great empire lie with a man named Cyrus II, known to all of history as Cyrus the Great. It was Cyrus who would unite the various disparate tribes of the great Iranian plateau under his single visionary rule. Before Cyrus, the entire region was dominated by the powerful Median Empire, which controlled a substantial part of the territory that would later become the heart of the Achaemenid Empire. And it was into this world that Cyrus was born, a member of a royal family, the son of Cambyses I, who was the king of a small state called Anshan, a vassal kingdom that was under the control of the Medes. His rise to power began in the year 559 BC, when he himself became the king of Anshan. However, Cyrus's ambition extended far beyond the modest beginnings of his small kingdom. What was the first great act that set Cyrus on his path to creating a world empire? It was the overthrow of his own masters, the Median Empire, in the year 550 BC. According to the ancient sources, such as the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus raised a great revolt against his own grandfather, Astyages, who was the last king of the Medes. In a decisive battle, the Median forces were defeated, and their great capital city of Ecbatana was captured. With this single stunning victory, Cyrus managed to unite the two great peoples, the Medes and the Persians, under his own rule, laying the essential foundation for the great Achaemenid Empire that was to come. But this unification was more than just a military conquest. It was a brilliant and strategic alliance. By cleverly incorporating the Median elites into his own administration, Cyrus ensured the stability of his newly formed empire. This model of governance, one which emphasized inclusion and a deep respect for local customs, would become a defining hallmark of all of Achaemenid rule. With the heartland of his new empire now secure, Cyrus's next major campaign was against the wealthy and powerful kingdom of Lydia, which was located in what is now modern-day Western Turkey. The Lydian king, Croesus, was a man who was renowned throughout the ancient world for his immense and legendary wealth. But he dangerously underestimated the military acumen and the strategic genius of the rising Cyrus. In the year 546 BC, after a series of battles, Cyrus decisively defeated King Croesus at the Great Battle of Timbra. The fall of the kingdom of Lydia brought vast and unimaginable riches into the new Persian treasury and extended Cyrus's empire all the way to the shores of the Aegean Sea. The conquest of Lydia also allowed Persia to dominate the prosperous Greek cities of Ionia, which were located along the western coast of Asia Minor. And while these proud cities initially resisted Persian rule, they were eventually integrated into the empire. This expansion brought the new Persian Empire into direct and fateful contact with the Greek world, setting the stage for the great conflicts that were to come in the future. But what was Cyrus's most celebrated and perhaps his greatest achievement? It was the conquest of the great and ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire in the year 539 BC. The city of Babylon was a true wonder of the ancient world, a center of immense wealth, high culture, and great power. But it was ruled at the time by a king named Nabonidus, a man who had alienated much of his own population due to his unorthodox and unpopular religious policies. Cyrus, a master of both warfare and propaganda, took full advantage of this internal unrest. He masterfully presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator who had come to restore order and traditional religious practices. The fall of the great city of Babylon was, as a result, a remarkably peaceful event. According to the famous Cyrus cylinder, an ancient clay artifact that is often regarded as the world's first declaration of human rights, Cyrus entered the city without any significant resistance and was warmly welcomed by its people. He restored the local religious practices that Nabonidus had suppressed, an act that earned him the deep loyalty of the Babylonian people. And Cyrus's famous decision to allow the exiled Jewish people to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild their sacred temple further cemented his reputation as a benevolent and enlightened ruler. Cyrus's approach to governance was truly revolutionary for its time. Unlike the other great empires of the age, which often ruled through fear, brutality, and oppression, Cyrus emphasized a policy of cooperation and a deep respect for local traditions. He allowed the peoples he conquered to retain their own customs, their own religions, and even their own local leaders, as long as they pledged their loyalty and paid their tribute to the great Persian Empire. To administer his vast new territories, Cyrus established a centralized bureaucracy, a system that would be further refined and perfected by his successors. He also introduced a system of well-maintained roads and a highly efficient communication network that would facilitate both trade and governance across his vast empire. The reign of Cyrus the Great came to an end in the year 530 BC, when he died during a military campaign against a nomadic tribe in Central Asia. His death marked the end of an era, but his incredible legacy would endure for centuries. Cyrus was remembered not only as a great conqueror, but also as a truly visionary leader who had laid the foundation for one of history's most influential and admired empires. His tomb at Pasargadae, a simple yet elegant structure, remains a powerful symbol of his enduring legacy to this very day. He is rightly celebrated as one of history's greatest rulers, whose revolutionary policies of tolerance and inclusivity set a new standard for governance that would influence empires for centuries to come. After the death of the great Cyrus, the immense and challenging task of continuing the expansion of the newly forged Achaemenid Empire fell to his son, Cambyses II. While his reign is often overshadowed by the almost mythical status of his father and the great administrative genius of his successor, Darius the Great, the reign of Cambyses represents a truly critical and turbulent period in the history of the Persian Empire. Cambyses not only expanded the empire to its greatest extent yet, by achieving the long-held Persian dream of conquering the ancient and wealthy land of Egypt, but he also faced significant internal challenges that would ultimately destabilize the empire and lead to a profound succession crisis. This is the story of his ambitious achievements, his controversial rule, and his mysterious and untimely end. Cambyses officially became king in the year 530 BC, after his father Cyrus died during a military campaign against the Massagetæ, a nomadic tribe in the vast plains of Central Asia. According to the historical accounts, Cyrus had diligently prepared Cambyses for leadership, appointing him as co-ruler in the latter years of his reign to ensure a smooth and stable transition of power. And what an inheritance it was. Cambyses came to rule a sprawling and diverse empire that stretched all the way from the Indus Valley in the east to the shores of Asia Minor in the west. His early reign was focused on consolidating this vast territory and maintaining the sophisticated administrative systems that his father had so brilliantly established. But there was also the matter of his younger brother, Bardia, also known as Smerdis. He played a significant and ultimately tragic role in the political narrative of Cambyses' reign. To prevent a potential rivalry for the throne, some ancient sources claim that Cambyses secretly ordered Bardia's execution before he set out on his great military campaigns, a dark deed that would come back to haunt the empire. What was Cambyses' most notable and ambitious achievement? It was the conquest of Egypt in the year 525 BC, a military campaign that marked the Achaemenid Empire's successful expansion into the continent of Africa. At the time of Cambyses' campaign, Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Psamtik III of the 26th dynasty. Egypt had, for millennia, been a wealthy and powerful kingdom with a long and proud tradition of resisting foreign domination. Cambyses launched his military campaign against Egypt by leading his well-prepared army across the harsh and unforgiving Sinai Desert. The decisive engagement of the war was the Great Battle of Pelusium, which was fought near the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. And it was here that, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cambyses used a brilliant and cunning psychological tactic. Knowing that cats were sacred animals to the Egyptians, he reportedly had his soldiers place cats on the front lines of his army. The Egyptian soldiers, deeply reluctant to harm these sacred creatures, were thrown into disarray, their lines faltering. This clever tactic, combined with the superior military might of the Persian army, led to a resounding Persian victory. After the defeat at Pelusium, Cambyses captured the great Egyptian capital city of Memphis, and the pharaoh Psamtik III was taken prisoner. Egypt was now officially incorporated into the Achaemenid Empire. But what kind of ruler was Cambyses in his newly conquered territory? Here, the historical accounts are deeply conflicted. Some sources suggest that Cambyses, much like his father, sought to legitimize his rule by showing a deep respect for Egyptian customs and religious practices. He is said to have participated in their traditional rituals and maintained the worship of the Egyptian deities. Other accounts, however, particularly those from Greek historians, portray Cambyses as a cruel and impious tyrant who desecrated Egyptian temples and disrespected their local customs. Herodotus, for example, famously claims that Cambyses, in a fit of rage, killed the sacred Apis bull, a divine symbol of fertility and strength, an act that would have deeply and unforgivably offended the entire Egyptian populace. But modern archaeological evidence suggests a different story, indicating that the sacred bull was actually buried with all of its full religious honors during Cambyses' reign. This highlights the great challenges we face in interpreting ancient sources, which are often colored by cultural and political bias. While Cambyses was achieving this great military success in Egypt, however, his reign back home was marked by growing internal instability. While he was away campaigning, a man claiming to be his brother Bardia, the very brother Cambyses had allegedly executed, seized power in the heart of Persia. This individual, who history has come to know as the false Bardia, gained widespread support among the Persian satraps and declared himself the new king. This rebellion highlighted a growing discontent within the empire, particularly among the provinces that resented Cambyses' heavy taxation and his long military campaigns. Upon hearing this news, Cambyses began a march back to Persia to reclaim his throne. But he would never make it. He died under mysterious circumstances in the year 522 BC. Some sources suggest he accidentally wounded himself with his own sword, while others hinted a more sinister end, such as assassination or a sudden illness. His sudden and unexpected death left the empire in a state of absolute turmoil as the false Bardia continued to rule, creating a deep succession crisis that would pave the way for the rise of one of the empire's greatest leaders, Darius the Great. The reign of Darius V, a man history would come to know as Darius the Great, marked a truly pivotal period in the history of the Achaemenid Empire. Following the chaos of Cambyses' mysterious death and the subsequent uprising of the man known as the false Bardia, Darius not only secured the throne for himself, but also completely transformed the Achaemenid Empire into a highly efficient, brilliantly centralized and expansive state. His sweeping administrative reforms, his ambitious infrastructure projects, and his successful military conquests would solidify the Persian Empire as the largest and most sophisticated of its time. This is the story of the great organizer, the king who gave the empire its enduring structure. But Darius' path to power was fraught with immense difficulty and danger. After Cambyses' death, the empire fell into disarray. A man claiming to be Bardia, Cambyses' supposedly executed brother, had seized power and gained widespread support from many of the provinces. Who was this man? Was he the true brother or a clever imposter? According to Darius' own official inscriptions, particularly the famous Behistun inscription which he had carved into a great cliff face, He and a group of 6 other Persian nobles discovered that this new ruler was not the real Bardia at all, but a Magian impostor named Gaumata. Darius and his allies then killed Gaumata and declared Darius the new king. Some modern historians, however, speculate that Darius may have fabricated this entire story to legitimize his own seizure of the throne. Whatever the truth, his claim was not immediately accepted. Darius faced widespread and violent rebellions across the entire empire, with major uprisings in Babylon, Media, Elam, and other regions. Over the course of 2 long and difficult years, Darius successfully and ruthlessly quelled all of these uprisings, demonstrating his formidable military skill and his unwavering determination to unify the empire under his sole command. To solidify his authority, he powerfully emphasized his own lineage back to the dynasty's founder, Achaemenes, and portrayed himself as having been chosen by the great Persian god, Ahura Mazda, to bring order to the world. And what was the first great task he undertook as king? Darius is perhaps best remembered for his sweeping and revolutionary administrative reforms, which transformed the Achaemenid Empire into a highly organized and remarkably efficient state. To govern such a vast and diverse territory, he divided the entire empire into approximately 20 satrapies, or provinces. Each of these satrapies was governed by a satrap, a provincial governor who was responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining security, and ensuring the loyalty of the province to the king. But how did he prevent these powerful governors from becoming too powerful themselves? To monitor their activities, Darius appointed special royal officials, known as the eyes and ears of the king, who would travel throughout the empire and report directly back to him. He also implemented a standardized and predictable system of taxation, with each satrapy assigned a specific annual tribute based on its economic output. This system ensured a steady and reliable flow of revenue to the central government while respecting the economic diversity of the different regions. And to further facilitate trade and unify the economy, Darius introduced the darik, a gold coin, and the siglos, a silver coin, which became the standard currency across his entire empire, creating a truly unified economic zone that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean Sea. But how do you connect such a vast empire? Darius's reign was also marked by a series of incredibly ambitious infrastructure projects. The most famous of these was the Great Royal Road, a vast network of highways that stretched over 1,500 miles from the city of Susa in the heart of Persia all the way to Sardis in Asia Minor. This remarkable road was equipped with relay stations and fresh horses, which enabled royal couriers to travel the entire distance in just 7 days, a truly incredible feat for the time. He also built a great canal that connected the Nile River to the Red Sea, facilitating maritime trade between Egypt and the Persian Gulf, a project that can be seen as a distant precursor to the modern Suez Canal. And it was Darius who began the great construction of Persepolis, the magnificent ceremonial capital that was designed to symbolize the grandeur and the unity of his empire. And did his military ambitions end with the consolidation of the empire? Not at all. Darius expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent yet. His campaigns in the east extended Persian control all the way to the Indus Valley, incorporating new territories in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. This expansion brought the Achaemenid Empire into direct contact with the rich and ancient cultures of South Asia. And, in the west, Darius launched military expeditions into Thrace and Macedonia, extending Persian influence into southeastern Europe. But his most famous military ventures were his campaigns against the Greeks. In 499 BC, several of the Greek city-states in Ionia revolted against Persian rule, sparking a conflict that would last for decades. Darius crushed the Ionian revolt and then sought to punish the cities of Athens and Eretria for their support of the rebels. This campaign culminated in the famous Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, where the Athenian army achieved a surprising and legendary victory against the larger Persian force. Despite this setback, Darius had laid the groundwork for all future attempts to subjugate Greece, a task that his son and successor Xerxes would continue. Darius the Great's reign finally ended in 486 BC, when he died while preparing for another campaign. His legacy, however, would endure for centuries. He was the great architect of the Achaemenid Empire, the man who transformed it into a centralized, efficient, and enduring state, and whose incredible reforms provided a model of governance that would influence great empires for centuries to come. The reign of Xerxes. The son and successor of Darius the Great is one of the most famous and dramatic in the entire history of the Achaemenid Empire, largely due to his monumental and ambitious campaigns against the city-states of Greece. Xerxes inherited an empire at its absolute peak, a colossal entity of immense power and wealth. But he also faced significant challenges, including the need to maintain internal stability across his vast territories and the burning desire to extend Persian influence deep into Europe, a task his father had left unfinished. While his reign is often remembered for the legendary invasions of Greece and the famous battles of Thermopylae and Salamis, Xerxes also left his own mark through grand construction projects and his own unique style of internal governance. Xerxes ascended to the great throne in the year 486 BC, following the death of his father, Darius. As the eldest son of Darius and his powerful wife, Queen Atossa, who was herself the daughter of the great Cyrus the Great, Xerxes had a strong and direct claim to the throne. His father had reportedly named him as his heir, specifically because of this direct lineage back to Cyrus, a move which greatly strengthened his legitimacy. But upon taking power, Xerxes immediately inherited several simmering rebellions, including major uprisings in the wealthy and strategically vital provinces of Egypt and Babylon. In 484 BC, Xerxes successfully and brutally suppressed the Egyptian revolt, reasserting Persian control and appointing a trusted satrap to govern the region. However, his measures, which included heavy taxation and a less tolerant approach than his predecessors, alienated the Egyptian populace. A revolt in the ancient city of Babylon soon followed, during which Xerxes reportedly desecrated the city's sacred temples and confiscated its religious statues, a significant and ominous shift away from the tolerant and inclusive policies of his father and Cyrus the Great. With his empire now seemingly under control, Xerxes turned his attention to the great ambition of his reign: the subjugation of Greece. This was more than just a military campaign. It was a matter of personal and national honor. He sought to finally avenge Persia's humiliating defeat at the Battle of Marathon 10 years earlier, and to succeed where his own father had failed. And so, he began to assemble one of the largest and most incredible military forces the ancient world had ever seen. The sheer scale of his army and navy was breathtaking. He drew forces from every corner of his vast and diverse empire. Ancient accounts, though likely exaggerated, claimed that his army numbered over 1 million soldiers, though modern historians suggest a more realistic, but still immense, force of around 100,000 to 200,000 men. His massive Persian navy was composed of ships from Phoenicia, Egypt, and the Greek cities of Asia Minor, a crucial component for supporting his land-based invasion. The invasion of Greece, which Xerxes launched in the year 480 BC, required extraordinary and unprecedented logistical planning. To cross the Hellespont, the narrow strait of water separating Asia from Europe, his engineers constructed a magnificent pontoon bridge, an incredible engineering achievement for the time. He also ordered the construction of a great canal across the isthmus of Mount Athos, a dangerous cape that had wrecked a previous Persian fleet, allowing his new navy to bypass the treacherous waters. These feats of engineering showcased the immense power and ingenuity of the Persian Empire. The first great and legendary clash of this new war came at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. Here, a small but incredibly brave Greek force, led by the famous King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, defended the pass against the overwhelming might of the Persian army. For 3 days, they held their ground in one of history's most famous last stands. The Persian army eventually overwhelmed the Greeks after a local resident betrayed them, by revealing a secret path around the pass. But despite their defeat, the heroic stand of the Spartans became an immortal symbol of courage and resistance, one that inspired a new and powerful sense of unity among the often fractious Greek city-states. After his victory at Thermopylae, Xerxes marched on and captured the city of Athens, which he burned to the ground in retribution for the burning of the Persian city of Sardis during the Ionian Revolt. But his triumph was to be short-lived. The Persian navy, his key to controlling the seas, faced the Greek fleet at the Battle of Salamis. This great naval battle was fought in a narrow strait, a place where the Greeks' smaller, more maneuverable ships had a distinct tactical advantage. The Greek fleet completely outfought the larger and more cumbersome Persian vessels, resulting in a decisive and catastrophic victory for the Greeks. This stunning naval defeat forced Xerxes to retreat back to Persia with much of his army, leaving a smaller force behind under his general, Mardonius, to continue the campaign. The final act of this great drama came the following year, in 479 BC, at the Battle of Plataea. Here, the remaining Persian land forces were decisively and utterly defeated by a great coalition of the Greek city-states led by the Spartans. This battle effectively ended Persian ambitions in mainland Greece once and for all. While his great military campaign against Greece had ultimately ended in failure, Xerxes' reign was not without its domestic achievements. He continued the grand construction projects that his father had initiated, particularly at the magnificent ceremonial capital of Persepolis. He built the famous Gate of All Nations, a grand entrance adorned with reliefs of delegates from all across the empire, a powerful symbol of the unity and diversity of Persian rule. However, his heavy-handed policies and his inability to secure a lasting victory in Greece foreshadowed the challenges that would later contribute to the decline of the great Achaemenid Empire. In 465 BC, Xerxes was assassinated in his own palace, the victim of a conspiracy involving members of his court. His death marked the beginning of a long period of instability, as his successors would struggle to maintain control over the vast and complex empire he had inherited. The Achaemenid Empire reached its absolute zenith under the great kings Darius and Xerxes, but the period that followed Xerxes' assassination in the year 465 BC marked the beginning of its long, gradual, and inexorable decline. A succession of weaker and less capable rulers, a series of persistent internal rebellions, and the growing external pressures from rising new powers all began to contribute to the weakening of the once mighty Persian Empire. Despite maintaining its vast territorial extent for many years, the empire began to lose its firm grip over its provinces, and it encountered a series of profound challenges that would culminate in its eventual final conquest by the young and brilliant Alexander the Great. Following the assassination of Xerxes, his son Artaxerxes ascended to the throne. His long reign was relatively stable compared to what was to come, but it was still marked by persistent internal strife and constant external threats. Almost immediately upon taking power, he faced challenges to his rule from potential rivals within the royal family and the empire's vast administration. But he successfully established his control, partly through the strategic appointment of loyal satraps. During his reign, the empire also faced continued resistance from the Greek city-states, particularly Athens and its powerful Delian League, which posed a significant and constant threat to Persian influence in the Aegean Sea. This long-running conflict finally culminated in the Peace of Callias in 449 BC, a treaty that officially ended the hostilities between Persia and Athens. Persia agreed to relinquish its claims to the Greek cities of Ionia in exchange for peace. While this was a significant diplomatic achievement that brought a measure of stability, it also marked a clear retreat from the earlier Persian ambitions of completely dominating the Greek world. The reign of the next king, Darius II, was plagued by even greater internal instability. A key factor in the Achaemenid Empire's decline was now becoming dangerously apparent: the increasing autonomy and power of the satraps, the provincial governors who often began to act as independent rulers in their own right. During Darius II's reign, these powerful governors, particularly in regions like Asia Minor and Egypt, began to wield significant power, sometimes acting directly against the interests of the central government. And in the year 404 BC, the empire suffered a major blow. The vital province of Egypt, a critical source of the empire's wealth and prestige, successfully rebelled and broke away from Persian control. This loss highlighted the empire's waning ability to maintain control over its far-flung territories. The long reign of the next king, Artaxerxes II, was marked by even more significant challenges, including a series of major rebellions that shook the very foundations of the empire. Between the years 366 and 360 BC, several powerful satraps in Asia Minor joined together and rebelled against the central government. This conflict, which has come to be known as the Great Satraps' Revolt, was fueled by deep dissatisfaction with the monarchy's increasing demands for taxes and resources. Although Artaxerxes II eventually managed to suppress the revolt, the event brutally exposed the empire's internal weaknesses and the growing, dangerous power of the provincial governors. At the same time, Persia's involvement in the complex and ever-shifting world of Greek affairs continued, with Artaxerxes brokering the so-called King's Peace in 387 BC, which temporarily reasserted Persian influence over the Greek cities of Asia Minor. His successor, Artaxerxes III, sought to reverse the long decline of the empire through aggressive military campaigns and sweeping administrative reforms. In a significant military achievement, he successfully reconquered the rebellious province of Egypt in 343 BC, restoring it to Persian control. This victory was a powerful demonstration that the empire was still capable of reasserting its dominance. He also implemented a series of measures to curb the power of the satraps and to strengthen his own central authority. These reforms did bring a temporary stability back to the empire, but they failed to address the deeper systemic issues that were causing its decay. And his reign, too, ended abruptly in 338 BC, when he was assassinated by a powerful court eunuch, a dark deed that plunged the empire into further chaos as a series of weak and short-lived rulers followed. It was into this weakened and fragmented state that the final ruler of the Achaemenid Empire, Darius III, inherited the throne. And it was he who would have to face the greatest external threat in all of Persian history, the rise of Macedonia under Philip II, and, subsequently, his brilliant son, Alexander the Great. By the time Darius III ascended the throne, Macedonia had already become a formidable and unified military power. And in the year 334 BC, the young Alexander launched his ambitious invasion of the Persian Empire. Darius III suffered a series of significant and devastating defeats at the great battles of Granicus, Issus, and finally, Gaugamela. This final battle, in 331 BC, resulted in a crushing defeat for Darius, and it effectively ended any organized Persian resistance. Darius fled eastward in a desperate attempt to regroup, but he was betrayed and killed by one of his own satraps in 330 BC. With his death, the great Achaemenid dynasty came to an end, and the young Alexander declared himself the rightful new ruler of the Persian Empire, a story for another time. The decline of this once great empire was a long and complex process, a result of a combination of internal weaknesses, from weak leadership to the growing power of the satraps, and the immense external pressure from the rising and unstoppable power of Alexander the Great. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, which lasted for over 2 centuries, was not only the largest empire of its time, but it was also one of the most culturally sophisticated and administratively innovative. Its vast size and its incredible diversity required a unique and revolutionary system of governance, one that could cleverly combine a strong, centralized authority with a deep and abiding respect for local traditions. The Persian approach to culture, to religion, and to governance was truly groundbreaking, fostering a remarkable sense of stability across a multi-ethnic empire that stretched all the way from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. This is the story of the brilliant systems that held this vast and diverse world together. How do you effectively govern such an immense and diverse empire, encompassing dozens of different cultures, languages, and religions? The Achaemenid Empire was renowned for its brilliant and effective system of governance, a system first established by Cyrus the Great and later refined and perfected by Darius the Great. The answer lay in the satrapy system. The Persians divided their entire territory into a series of administrative regions called satrapies, or provinces. Each of these satrapies was overseen by a governor, a satrap, who acted as the king's personal representative in that region. The satraps were responsible for the crucial tasks of collecting taxes, maintaining order, and overseeing the local military forces. But how did the great king, so far away in his magnificent capitals of Susa or Persepolis, prevent these powerful provincial governors from becoming too powerful themselves and rebelling? This was a key challenge for any ancient empire. The Persians devised a clever system of checks and balances. The king would appoint special royal officials, known as the eyes and ears of the king, who were loyal only to him. These officials would travel throughout the empire, conducting regular audits and inspections, and reporting directly back to the king on the activities of his satraps. This brilliant system ensured the loyalty of the governors while still allowing for a degree of localized governance, a balance of central authority and regional autonomy that was a key factor in the empire's long-lasting stability. Under Darius I, the empire also introduced a standardized and predictable system of taxation, with each satrapy contributing resources based on its own unique economic capacity. For example, the fertile lands of Babylon supplied vast amounts of grain. The distant province of India contributed immense quantities of gold dust, while Egypt provided agricultural products and precious papyrus. This system created a steady and reliable flow of wealth to the central government, while minimizing the economic burden on any single region. And the empire's success was also due to its incredible investment in infrastructure. Most famously, the Great Royal Road. Can you imagine a highway that stretched for over 1,500 miles, connecting the major cities of the empire? This road was equipped with relay stations that had fresh horses, which allowed royal couriers to travel the entire distance in just 7 days, a journey that would have taken an ordinary traveler 3 months. This incredible road facilitated trade, communication, and the rapid movement of military forces, making the Achaemenid Empire one of the most interconnected of its time. But the empire was more than just an efficient administrative machine. It was a vibrant cultural melting pot, blending the influences from the many great civilizations it encompassed, including those of Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and Greece. The Persians were master builders, and their architectural achievements reflected the grandeur of their empire. The most iconic example of this is the magnificent ceremonial capital of Persepolis. Founded by Darius I and expanded by his son Xerxes, Persepolis featured grand palaces, monumental staircases, and beautiful, intricate reliefs that depicted delegations from all across the empire, bringing tribute to the king. Persian art, like its architecture, emphasized the themes of unity and diversity, often depicting subjects from different cultures, all coming together in service to the great king. Achaemenid artisans were also incredibly skilled in metalwork, producing intricate gold and silver vessels, beautiful jewelry, and ceremonial items that often featured powerful animal motifs like lions, bulls, and griffins. And what about religion? Religion played a central role in the governance and the culture of the Achaemenid Empire, acting as both a unifying force and a means of legitimizing the king's authority. The official religion of the Achaemenid kings was Zoroastrianism, a faith founded by the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. This monotheistic faith emphasized the great cosmic duality of good and evil, with Ahura Mazda as the supreme god of light and truth. The kings viewed their rule as being divinely ordained by Ahura Mazda, and many of their royal inscriptions emphasize the dualistic struggle between good and evil, reflecting the core ideals of their faith. But despite their own strong adherence to Zoroastrianism, The Achaemenid rulers were famously and remarkably tolerant of other religions. This policy, which was first established by Cyrus the Great when he allowed the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, extended to all the other religions within the empire. By respecting local customs and deities, the Achaemenid kings fostered a sense of loyalty and minimized resistance among their incredibly diverse subjects. This respect for local customs, this inclusivity, and this remarkable administrative genius were the true secrets to the Achaemenid Empire's long and successful reign. As the great battle raged on, with the Polish heavy cavalry locked in a brutal and grinding struggle on the left flank, a sudden and unexpected development began to unfold on the right. The Lithuanian troops, who had been fiercely engaged with the Teutonic Knights for over an hour, weathering the storm of their heavy cavalry charges, began to withdraw from the field. This single movement, this retreat, whether it was a carefully planned tactical masterpiece or a desperate forced flight, would become the pivotal moment in the entire Battle of Grunwald, a turning point that would shape its final outcome and spark centuries of intense and passionate historical debate. From the perspective of the Teutonic Knights, watching the Lithuanian withdrawal, it must have seemed as though they were witnessing the very beginning of their great triumph. After an hour of brutal, inconclusive fighting, their relentless pressure had finally broken the enemy. Their spirits soared as they saw their adversaries seemingly fleeing the battlefield in disarray. One Teutonic commander exclaimed with triumphant glee, "The Lithuanians break! Victory is within our grasp!" This fatal and arrogant misinterpretation of the events that were unfolding before them, this assumption of an easy victory, would prove to be a costly and disastrous error. But what was the true nature of this retreat? This is the great question, the central mystery of the Battle of Grunwald. Was it a genuine rout, or a stroke of unparalleled military genius? The historical accounts, written in the aftermath of the battle, are conflicting, painting two very different pictures of what truly transpired on that fateful day. Some sources, particularly those more favorable to the Teutonic Order, describe the Lithuanian withdrawal as a complete and total rout, with the soldiers fleeing in panic and disarray under the relentless and unbearable pressure of the Teutonic heavy cavalry. It's an easy picture to imagine, a less disciplined force simply breaking under the weight of such a formidable and fearsome foe. Other, more nuanced interpretations, however, have proposed that this was not a rout at all. They suggest that it was, in fact, a brilliant and carefully planned tactical maneuver, a feigned retreat that was designed by the cunning Grand Duke Vytautas to lure the overconfident and arrogant Teutonic Knights into a deadly trap. These sources point out that the Lithuanian retreat bore a striking similarity to the classic military techniques that were often employed by the nomadic steppe warriors from the east. These cavalry units were famous for their use of feigned retreats to disrupt enemy formations, to stretch their lines, and to lure them into vulnerable positions, a tactic that had proven to be incredibly effective in numerous battles throughout history. Could Vytautas, one of the most brilliant military minds of his age, have orchestrated such a daring and complex maneuver on such a massive scale? Regardless of its true nature, whether it was a stroke of genius or a moment of sheer panic, the Lithuanian retreat had immediate and far-reaching consequences on the battlefield. The commanders of the Teutonic right wing, composed of their most elite and heavily armoured cavalry, saw what they believed to be a golden opportunity for a glorious and decisive victory. Breaking from their disciplined formations, they eagerly and impulsively pursued the withdrawing Lithuanians, hungry for the glory of the chase. This rash and undisciplined action, while seemingly advantageous in the heat of the moment, would prove to be a critical and fatal error. As the Teutonic Knights chased after the retreating Lithuanians, they inadvertently and dangerously overextended their lines, galloping far away from the main battle and creating a significant and fatal gap in the main Teutonic battle formation. This opening left their entire flank exposed and incredibly vulnerable, a dangerous situation to be in the midst of such a large-scale and chaotic engagement. The once solid and seemingly impenetrable Teutonic formation now had a gaping, weak point a vulnerability that could potentially be exploited by their cunning opponents. The shifting fortunes of the battle now resembled a great pendulum, swinging dramatically back and forth between the opposing forces. What had seemed like a moment of absolute triumph for the Teutonic Knights was, in reality, the very beginning of their downfall. The Lithuanian retreat, like the receding tide before a great tsunami, had drawn the Knights into a position of extreme vulnerability. And while this dramatic scene unfolded on one part of the battlefield, what of the Polish forces? On the left flank, they continued to hold their ground with incredible courage and unwavering determination against the main body of the Teutonic army. Their steadfast resistance, now that they were fighting alone, prevented the Teutonic Knights from fully capitalizing on what they perceived as a great advantage gained from the Lithuanian retreat. This incredible determination of the Polish troops to hold the line at all costs would prove to be absolutely crucial in the next decisive phase of the great battle. The true nature and the intent of the Lithuanian retreat may forever remain a subject of intense debate among historians. But whether it was a panicked flight or a brilliant tactical ploy, this single moment had marked a significant and irreversible turning point in the Battle of Grunwald, a moment that would seal the fate of the Teutonic Order. As the last of the Lithuanian forces vanished from the battlefield, a new and terrifying reality descended upon the Polish forces, who were now under the direct command of King Jagiełło. They were alone. The Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, the proud and confident Ulrich von Jungingen, seeing the sudden and dramatic departure of the Lithuanians, believed that the moment of his great triumph had finally arrived. He now sought to bring the full and undivided might of his army to bear, to break the remaining Polish lines and to secure a final, glorious and decisive victory. The renowned and formidable Polish heavy cavalry, the very pride of the kingdom, now found themselves suddenly and dangerously outnumbered, fighting a desperate battle for their very survival. The absence of their Lithuanian allies had left a glaring and dangerous vulnerability in their formation, a weakness that the Teutonic Knights, with their centuries of battlefield experience, swiftly and ruthlessly began to exploit. The clash of steel, which had already been deafening, now intensified to a hellish roar as the Knights pressed their advantage. Their white surcoats with the stark, black crosses became a relentless, surging sea of motion across the blood-soaked field. It was in this critical moment that the Grandmaster, Ulrich von Jungingen, made a bold and decisive move, one that would shape the final course of the battle. He personally led a massive charge of 16 of his best and most elite banners, which represented nearly a third of his remaining forces. The very ground trembled under the thundering hooves of hundreds upon hundreds of heavily armored warhorses as they charged like an avalanche of steel directly towards the Polish lines, their target clear. The great royal banner of Krakow, the very heart and soul of the Polish army. The knights guarding the royal banner fought with an unparalleled and desperate ferocity, knowing that the loss of their standard would be a devastating, perhaps fatal blow to the morale of the entire army. Among them, a young knight, his armor gleaming in the harsh sunlight, stood out, felling multiple Teutonic Knights in rapid succession and rallying his comrades with his incredible valor. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though the great banner might fall, a moment that could have turned the tide of the entire battle and sealed Poland's fate. King Jagiełło, observing this desperate struggle from a nearby hill, his heart no doubt pounding in his chest, made a crucial decision. He committed his final reserves to the battle, sending these fresh troops surging forward to shore up the faltering line. These reinforcements lent a new and vital strength to the beleaguered Polish forces, and the battle reached its absolute zenith, a brutal, grinding struggle with neither side yielding a single inch of ground. The cries of the wounded and the dying mingled with the constant, deafening clash of weapons and the thunderous impact of cavalry charges. The very earth seemed to groan under the immense weight of this titanic struggle. For the men caught in the melee, the world narrowed to a terrifying few feet, a space where life and death were decided by a single stroke of skill or a moment of will. Polish knights fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland, while the Teutonic warriors fought to uphold the long and proud honor of their order. And just as the Polish lines seemed ready to finally buckle under the immense and relentless pressure, a new and unexpected sight appeared on the horizon. The Lithuanians had returned. Having successfully regrouped after their brilliant tactical retreat, they now came thundering back onto the field. Their sudden and shocking reappearance shifted the entire momentum of the battle in a single, dramatic instant. What must the Teutonic Knights have thought in that moment? The men who had been so confidently pursuing the Lithuanians were now caught completely by surprise, trapped in a precarious and deadly position. The resurgent Polish-Lithuanian forces, their spirits buoyed by this stunning reversal of fortunes, now launched a powerful and coordinated assault from two directions, a classic hammer and the anvil maneuver. The steadfast Polish forces became the anvil holding the line, while the returning Lithuanian cavalry became the great hammer, crashing into the now exposed rear of the Teutonic army. The Teutonic forces were now threatened with complete envelopment. Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen, the very man who had committed so much of his force to his own bold charge, now found himself in grave danger of being cut off and surrounded. The battle now entered its final, decisive phase. Grand Duke Vytautas, leading his returning Lithuanian cavalry, directed his forces in a devastating charge against the now disorganized rear of the Teutonic right flank, splitting the enemy lines and throwing them into complete and utter disarray. The knights who had so eagerly pursued the Lithuanians earlier now found themselves isolated and vulnerable, attacked from both the front and the rear. The battlefield transformed into a series of chaotic and desperate melees as the once disciplined Teutonic formation began to completely fracture under the relentless Polish-Lithuanian assault. The Grandmaster, witnessing the utter disintegration of his army, frantically issued orders to regroup, but it was too late. The distinctive white surcoats of the Teutonic Knights, now stained with mud and blood, became isolated islands in a raging sea of combat. The dream of Teutonic dominion was crumbling before the determined and brilliant onslaught of the Polish-Lithuanian forces, their great gamble having turned into a catastrophic and fatal trap as the long, bloody afternoon began to fade into a hazy, blood-red twilight. The fate of the Teutonic Order, an institution that had shaped the course of Eastern Europe for 2 centuries, now hung precariously in the balance. The Grandmaster, the proud and formidable Ulrich von Jungingen, the very embodiment of the Order's immense power and prestige, found himself confronted with a dire and almost unbelievable situation. His once formidable army, which had marched onto the fields of Grunwald with such supreme and arrogant confidence just a few hours earlier, now lay fragmented, bleeding, and almost completely surrounded. Their dreams of dominion over the Baltic region were crumbling before the determined and relentless onslaught of the Polish-Lithuanian forces. In this moment of absolute and escalating crisis, with his army on the very verge of total annihilation, von Jungingen made a decision that would resonate through the annals of military history. A final, desperate, and incredibly heroic gamble. What does a leader do when all seems lost? Does he surrender? Does he flee? Ulrich von Jungingen chose a different path. Realizing the perilous state of his army, he gathered his most elite and loyal knights around him, the very cream of Teutonic chivalry. These were the men who had sworn sacred oaths to fight and die for their order, warriors clad in their distinctive white surcoats emblazoned with the stark black cross, now stained with the grime and blood of a long day's battle. They represented the last fading hope for a Teutonic victory, and von Jungingen, in a final breathtaking display of both sheer desperation and incredible chivalric valor, chose to lead a final charge himself. What was his aim? Was it a calculated tactical move to break through the encircling Polish-Lithuanian lines and create an escape route? Or was it a final, glorious act of defiance, a choice to meet his end in the heat of battle, rather than in the shame of surrender? We may never know for sure. As the Grandmaster and his chosen band of warriors prepared for their assault, a new and terrible tension gripped the battlefield. The air, already thick with the sounds of clashing steel and the cries of the wounded, seemed to thicken even further, as if holding its breath for this final dramatic act. Von Jungingen, his magnificent armor glinting in the fading, bloody light, raised his great sword high. "For God and the Order," he cried, his voice ringing out across the field as he spurred his powerful warhorse forward. The thunderous hoofbeats of his elite force echoed across the field as they charged like a thunderbolt directly into the thickest and most desperate fighting. A small, white-clad island of defiance against a raging sea of enemies. The Teutonic Knights crashed into the Polish-Lithuanian lines with a devastating and ferocious force. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, their desperate gambit seemed as though it might actually succeed. The sheer ferocity of their assault, born of desperation, staggered the Allied forces, creating a small, temporary breach in their formation, a fleeting glimmer of hope in the twilight. Yet, the numerical superiority of the Polish-Lithuanian army was simply too great to overcome. The breach was quickly sealed, and the Grandmaster's elite force found itself completely enveloped, fighting a desperate battle on all sides. As the great battle raged around the Grandmaster, his final heroic moments became shrouded in the bloody fog of war, a chaotic tapestry of conflicting accounts and heroic last stands. Some historical chronicles claim that von Jungingen, fighting in the thick of the melee, fell to a well-aimed lance thrust from a Polish knight, the sharp point finding a small, unprotected gap in his heavy plate armor. Other accounts describe a more personal and chaotic confrontation, with the Grandmaster, unhorsed and fighting on foot, finally being cut down by a sword blow in the brutal close-quarters combat. The famous Polish chronicler Jan Długosz, whose father fought in the battle, recorded a particularly vivid and detailed account of von Jungingen's last stand. According to Długosz, the Grandmaster fought with a remarkable and inspiring valor, his great sword a blur of motion as he cut down several Polish knights before finally being surrounded and overwhelmed by a group of Polish warriors. "God have mercy!" von Jungingen allegedly cried, his final words before he was struck down by multiple fatal blows. The fall of the great Grandmaster, Ulrich von Jungingen, sent a final devastating shockwave through the Teutonic ranks. As word of their leader's demise, whispered and then shouted from man to man, spread like wildfire through the battlefield, many of the remaining knights lost all heart. The profound, psychological impact of losing their Grandmaster, their leader, and their symbol, combined with their already precarious and hopeless military situation, proved to be too much for the Order's morale to bear. Von Jungingen's death marked the true and final turning point in the battle. While some small pockets of Teutonic resistance remained, fighting on with the desperate courage of men who knew their cause was utterly lost, the overall outcome was no longer in any doubt. The Polish-Lithuanian forces, emboldened by their incredible success and sensing their final, total victory, now pressed their advantage with renewed and ruthless vigor. As the sun finally set on the blood-soaked fields of Grunwald, the final phase of the battle transformed into a complete and total rout. The once mighty Teutonic battle formation had disintegrated into utter chaos, and with it, the Order's long and bloody dreams of dominion over the Baltic region. The Polish and Lithuanian cavalry pursued the fleeing Teutonic Knights into the fading light, while their infantry mopped up the last desperate pockets of resistance. The great battle was finally over. The black cross of the Teutonic Order had been broken. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long and somber shadows across the blood-soaked fields of Grunwald, the true and terrible cost of the great victory began to emerge. The fall of the Grandmaster, Ulrich von Jungingen, had shattered the Teutonic Order's resolve, transforming their once formidable army into a scattered and desperate rabble. Many of the surviving knights, their iconic white surcoats now stained with mud and gore, attempted to flee the carnage in the gathering darkness, while others formed small, desperate pockets of resistance, fighting on with grim determination until they were overwhelmed. The Polish-Lithuanian forces, though utterly exhausted from hours of the most intense and brutal combat, now faced the crucial task of securing their hard-won and monumental triumph. King Jagiellon and Grand Duke Vytautas issued swift orders to their commanders. The allied cavalry thundered across the battlefield in pursuit of the fleeing Teutonic Knights, while the infantry began the grim task of mopping up the last pockets of resistance. What did the battlefield look like in that moment? It had been transformed into a grotesque and haunting tableau of medieval warfare's true brutality. Thousands of bodies lay strewn across the trampled earth, their armor glinting dully in the fading light. Priests moved among the fallen, offering last rites to friend and foe alike, while surgeons worked frantically in the flickering torchlight to save those who could be saved. The very cream of the Teutonic leadership had been cut down, a blow from which the Order's military command would never truly recover. The dust had barely settled on the battlefield of Grunwald when a new and immense challenge emerged for the victorious Polish-Lithuanian alliance. Despite their resounding and total triumph in the field, the true test now lay in capitalizing on this momentum to strike at the very heart of Teutonic power. The Order's imposing and seemingly impregnable fortress of Marienburg, a symbol of their dominance for generations. This was the final obstacle that stood between the alliance and a total and complete victory. However, as the Allied forces gathered after the grueling battle, a critical window of opportunity began to slip away. The army was exhausted, and there were immense logistical challenges in moving such a large force. This delay in marching on Marienburg Castle, though understandable, would prove to be incredibly costly. It gave the battered Teutonic Order precious time to regroup and to fortify their defences, setting the stage for a long and difficult siege. A man named Heinrich von Plauen, who had missed the catastrophic defeat at Grunwald, now found himself thrust into this crisis. With remarkable speed and skill, he organised the castle's defences, rallying the surviving knights and local citizens. He was seen on the battlements, shouting encouragement and defiance, reigniting the spirits of his men. By late July, the siege of Marienburg began in earnest. The Polish-Lithuanian forces now faced a fortress that lived up to its legendary reputation. Marienburg's massive walls, complemented by moats and drawbridges, seemed unbreakable. As the weeks of the siege stretched into months, the besieging army faced its own mounting challenges. Their supply lines were stretched thin, and disease began to spread through the ranks. Diplomatic maneuvers also added a new layer of complexity, as the Order's allies across Europe began to exert political pressure on King Jagiellon to end the campaign. By September, the harsh realities of the siege were clear. Marienburg, under the brilliant leadership of von Plauen, showed no signs of capitulating. On September 19, 1410, the siege was lifted. The Polish-Lithuanian army withdrew, leaving the great fortress battered but unbroken. The failure to capture Marienburg limited the immediate impact of the victory at Grunwald, allowing the Order to maintain a crucial foothold in the region. And so, the two great powers found themselves at a crossroads. The sweeping victory on the battlefield had not translated into the swift collapse of the Order that many had anticipated. As the harsh winter of 1410 set in, the appetite for a diplomatic resolution grew on both sides. The Peace of Thorn was signed on February 1st, 1411, and its terms were surprisingly modest. Poland regained Dobrzyn land, and Lithuania's control over Samogitia was recognized, but only for the lifetimes of Jagiellon and Vytautas. The most significant provision was the substantial financial indemnity that was imposed on the Teutonic Order. While many in Poland and Lithuania felt the treaty fell far short of what they had earned, its true impact was psychological. The Battle of Grunwald had shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Teutonic Knights for 2 centuries. The financial burden of the indemnity proved to be a crushing, killing blow for the Order. To meet the payments, they were forced to raise taxes, leading to widespread discontent among their own subjects. This accelerated their economic decline and plunged them into a profound crisis of identity and purpose from which they would never recover. The Battle of Grunwald's impact extended far beyond the immediate aftermath. It cemented the rise of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as a major European power. However, this new ascendancy brought its own challenges, as the vast and diverse Commonwealth would face its own internal struggles in the centuries to come. The weakened Teutonic Order faced mounting internal pressures, culminating in further rebellions and the 13 Years' War, which ultimately saw the Order become a vassal of the Polish crown. But what is the truest and most enduring legacy of this great battle? It is its profound effect on the development of national identities in the region. In Poland and Lithuania, the victory became a powerful and enduring symbol of national pride and resistance against foreign domination, immortalized in art, literature, and popular culture. It would be invoked centuries later by nationalist movements as a rallying cry against foreign occupation. The battle marked the effective end of the crusading era in the region and led to a re-evaluation of the role of military religious orders throughout Europe. It was a pivotal moment in military history as well, challenging the long-held assumptions about the supremacy of heavy armored cavalry and ushering in a new era of tactical sophistication. As we reflect on this great battle, we are reminded that its legacy is not just one of military victory, but of profound political and cultural transformation, a story whose echoes continue to resonate in the history and identity of Eastern Europe to this very day. And with that, our story of the Great Battle of Grunwald comes to its end. Let the echoes of clashing steel and the cries of battle now fade into the quiet of the night. It is time for history to rest, and it is time for you to rest as well. Good night, and have peaceful dreams.